Aloha and welcome. I think we'll have to do. Sorry about that. Welcome to this month's edition of the East-West Center Research Program Speaker Series. Through this series, we try to bring experts from across the Asia-Pacific region to talk about the social, economic, environmental, and political transitions that are shaping the region. So Hawaii is at the forefront of climate change, and it is expected to, and climate change is, and many manifestations of climate change are expected to impact the vulnerable populations of the state in myriad ways. So we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Ketty Loeb, who works as faculty at the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience, University of Hawaii, to talk about the issues further and to help us understand how the political side of climate change adaptation, what is the political response been and what shapes these responses. That's been a part of our research. Dr. Loeb offers a wealth of knowledge about sustainability and resilience strategies, both locally and globally. Her research interests include climate change adaptation and mitigation, philanthropy and civil society capacity building, social movements and politics in Asia Pacific. She has vast experience in raising funds for mobilizing financial resources for as well through research grants to examine some of these issues further. So before I hand over the floor to Dr. Loeb, a small logistical note, especially for those who are online. Please post your questions on in the Q&A box that you can see, and the moderator will funnel the questions to Dr. Loeb. So without further ado, Ketty, over to you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Sorry. Jamin, can I get your help? Thanks. There we go. I think I've got it. Thank you. Okay, how's that? Okay, now we've got it. So thank you so much to the East-West Center for inviting me to speak today. I'd also like to thank Sandeep for the gracious invitation, and Jamin and Kelly and the broader East-West Center team for all the support they provided in bringing me here. And it's just always a pleasure for me to come to the East-West Center. I consider you all my ohana. Previously worked here, and always keep a close eye on everything you do. So it's a pleasure to be back here. And today I'm going to be talking about a train of research that I've been working on related to sea level rise adaptation here in Hawaii with my research partner, Colin Moore, at University of Hawaii. He's at the Matsunaga Peace Institute and also posted out of UHERO here at UH. He was unable to join us today, so it will just be me presenting. But today's talk is titled "The Sea is Rising, Risk Perceptions and Policy Preferences Among Hawaii's Elected Officials." And it's not advancing. There we go. So I would just wanted to start by, talking a bit with you folks about why we conducted the survey that is the basis of this research project. And firstly, as we were researching adaptation around the region, we noticed that there is a distinct need for more survey work around climate change adaptation. There has been a lot of survey work around climate change, generally speaking, about people's perceptions related to greenhouse gas emissions and whether or not the temperatures are changing, whether or not climate change is happening at all. conducted by the excellent work of the Yale Program for Climate Change Communications, the Pew Center, and a lot of sort of one-off studies around the country and around the world. But not very many studies have been conducted about adaptation, and really fewer even around adaptation and to climate change that has anything to do with policymakers themselves. Elected officials are obviously key in our ability to respond to climate change and sea level rise because they're kind of the gatekeepers. They're the ones that are pushing the policy through. And yet so little research has been done on what they think. And so we really wanted to hone in on that question. What do policymakers think about what's happening, and what do they think they'd like to do in response? And then the third piece is Hawaii is a case study. Why did we conduct the study in Hawaii? Well, we think Hawaii is, in the United States, one of the most likely cases for having a rapid response to sea level rise, because Hawaii is among, it's one of the most geographically remote and vulnerable places. We know we're at the front lines along with other Pacific islands for sea level rise. Most of our population lives on or near the coasts. And it's a blue state. So politically, a lot of studies about climate change that look at the political lines within the United States between Democrats and Republicans, while there's a lot more hesitancy to acknowledge that climate change and sea level rise is happening among the Republican Party members. It's very usually Democrats are more likely to acknowledge that these things are happening. And Hawaii is overwhelmingly a blue state, right? We only have 6 or 8 Republicans in our state. So it seemed like, in terms of case studies, a really good place to start. So thus, we undertook this research. A little bit about the methodology. So again, as I mentioned, we're focused on elected officials. We got survey information on all elected officials in the state, so both the Senate and the House, and across all 4 counties in Hawaii, so county council members. We conducted the survey via SurveyMonkey, and ended up having to do a lot of door knocking at the state capitol. Another great reason to do this kind of research in Hawaii is it's a pretty small state, and it's pretty easy to get down to the Capitol and go harass your legislators. So we were able to do a fair amount of that. And then the survey was conducted last year between June and September. So one thing I'd like to point out is that during the course of the survey, during this period, the Lahaina wildfires took place. And so we do admit that that may have introduced some bias into the survey, because people were suddenly thinking an awful lot about climate change and adaptation and the hazards thereof. And then finally, about the survey, when we conducted it, we made sure it was anonymous so that policymakers could feel very comfortable to talk about, what they're really feeling. There were 27 questions, mostly close-ended. That means people couldn't necessarily write in their responses. And so take all of this with a bit of a grain of salt. And the reason why is, as we look at the survey responses, you'll see we had a response rate of 29% down here in the bottom right corner. 29% response rate for elected officials is actually really, really good. You may think, oh, that's pretty low, but usually people get around 20, 21%. And so again, the fact that we have more face-to-face with elected officials here in Hawaii made it, I think, easier for us to get a better response rate. But that said, and this is the real caveat to the research and to everything that I say after this, while the survey was anonymous, we suspect that the people who responded are probably the people that are already the most concerned about sea level rise and the people that are already working on it. And so while I can give you results about, 29% of the whole pool of people, we don't know that it can be representative of all the elected officials, right, at the state and county level. So just keep that in mind. But again, this is a very, very good response rate. Okay, so now proceeding to the core of our findings, and we asked a number of questions, some about things like beliefs and knowledge. Do people think sea level rise is happening? What do they know about it? We then proceeded into questions about what risks, whether the perception of how risky it is or how concerned people are. And then finally, we went into some policy-related questions. So that's kind of how this talk is structured. Okay, so the first question that I wanted to just highlight, which is like good news, is that this question about sea level rise refers to, the rising water level in the Earth's ocean. Do you think that it's happening, right? Is sea level rise happening? And I'm really pleased to say that 100% of our respondents think it is. Now, again, Hawaiians are, I think visibly seeing that sea level rise is happening. So in some sense, it's not surprising. Again, blue state, there's a lot of people thinking about this. But in terms of the United States, generally speaking, about a third of US citizens don't think that sea level rise or climate change is happening based on polling. So it's a good start to say, okay, well, everyone, all of these policymakers believe that sea level rise is afoot. And then what are the causes of sea level rise? Okay, what do they think the causes are? And it's also great. 52% believe that sea level rise is a result of a combination of human activities and natural processes. 48% believe that sea level rise is a result of human activities specifically. And notably, no respondents believe that it's only a result of natural processes. Again, this is in distinct contrast to elsewhere in the US, where, again, I don't know, 29, 30% of respondents, don't think it's happening, and B, think it's, just naturally, El Nino or something like that, right? So again, our supposition that sea level rise would be, more people would know more about it in Hawaii, I think is correct, and that they're worried about it, as we'll see. The next set of questions has to do with risk perceptions. So the first question was, sea level rise is already impacting coastlines in my district. How strongly do you agree or disagree with this statement? So as you see, there's both state and county council members strongly agree that sea level rise is already impacting coastlines in their districts, right? 47% of all respondents strongly agree, 16% agree, 19%, somewhat agree. Very little dissent that it's already happening. And then the next question, what is your personal level of concern about sea level rise? And again, there are a lot more, 50% of the respondents are concerned, and another 44% are very concerned. So the majority of respondents are, starting to really be concerned that this is happening. Another question, when do you think sea level rise will start to harm people in your district? When will the harm begin? And again, this is about timeline, right? Our science tells us, we might be seeing, 3.2 to 6 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. Today, I just was at a talk where people were supposing it could be 10 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. And so when you look at these results, you see that actually the policymakers who responded think it's either happening now or within the next 25 years. It's like it's going to start getting bad for our island, right? And so that's a heightened timeline compared to what we're thinking about scientifically. Then over the next 50 years, how serious will the impacts be on Hawaii residents? And again, this is a key slide. People think it's going to be either significant or catastrophic. Nobody that responded thinks it's going to be minimal or insignificant. So you can see our policymakers and the respondents are very worried, and they think that there could be really catastrophic impacts going forward in 50 years, which is a short timeline. And I just want to contrast that with the real punchline and the takeaway is that even though they're that concerned, sea level rise is not necessarily at the top of their priority list. We're going to get down to that, but just keep that in mind as I keep walking through these a little more texture as to what in particular they're worried about. So the next couple questions have to do digging into the specific consequences that that our policymakers think are going to happen within the next 50 years. Some very general consequences. And I just want to point out for the next 3 slides, look at the sea of green. This essentially means that policymakers are, think that a wide variety of sea level rise impacts are going to be likely in the next 50 years, okay? And a lot of the darker the green, the more virtually certain they are, right? So we've got frequent flooding in coastal areas, groundwater inundation, coastline erosion, loss of beaches, destruction of natural habitat, contamination, reduction, loss of freshwater resources, and loss of natural resources, right? Next slide digs into what socioeconomic consequences they're predicting. Loss of important cultural sites and practices, loss of recreational sites, damage or loss of coastal properties, public and private, disruption or losses in major tourism and resort areas, increase in insurance premiums. This is something everybody's kind of watching, or that insurance companies might stop coverage due to high risk, right? Huge amount of, concern and identification of different topics that we should be watching as a result of sea level rise. Sorry. The last one, let's see, there should be one more. Okay, and then the other bit is, people are also thinking that there's going to be a loss of government revenues, property taxes, right? Forced relocation of communities, sea level rise related migration in the region into or out of Hawaii, public health related issues related to cesspool leakage and saltwater inundation, public health issues related to environmental contaminants, and increased socioeconomic inequity. So again, the key takeaway here is, they're seeing that there's going to be a wide variety of impacts due to sea level rise here in Hawaii in the next 50 years, if no action is taken, right? So given all that, what do they think, how well do they think our state and counties are prepared? Here we see all respondents are saying that the state is underprepared or only somewhat prepared. Nobody thinks the state is moderately prepared, right? And it looks like, just looking at the split between state and county council members, the county council members are slightly more, think that we're less prepared, right? As they're looking at the state, generally speaking. And then looking at the counties, again, mostly people are thinking the counties are underprepared or only somewhat prepared. Just like, I don't know, 6% or so of respondents think that Honolulu County or Kauai County are moderately prepared. And again, remember, a lot of these responses came in after the Lahaina wildfires, so people might be thinking about county preparedness in general. But we also wanted to point out that you see the gray on the far right. A lot of people just didn't really know what to think about the counties, and particularly Hawaii County, Kauai, or Maui, right? I think there's an opportunity for all the respondents, whether they're county council members or state officials, to learn more about the level of preparedness and educate themselves. about these issues. Okay, so now moving on to policy preferences, and the first slide, again, this is again what we think is really the punchline of this whole research project was considering all the items on your list and considering all the things we just went through, their level of concern and level of preparedness. You know, where does the topic of sea level rise adaptation fall in your legislative priorities? And, you know, for state legislators, you see 17% move it to the top. No county council members do. And then, you know, it's more kind of middling. A lot of people put it to the middle of their list, maybe high priority, but may not make it to the legislative session. And this actually bears out. I pulled some of the data on the 2024 legislature, and I found only 6 or 7 policies had been presented related directly to sea level rise. What's on people's mind this year are wildfires, and there was something like 70 proposed, you know, policies related to wildfire. So I don't want to say there should be a priority about we need to be thinking about adaptation generally speaking, but just interesting to see that despite all of this concern, there's just not many policies being proposed at the state level. Okay, so next I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the policy responses that we ran by the legislators. And in order to do that, I don't know how many of you here spend a lot of time thinking about sea level rise adaptation. So just to give you a little context and a little background, typically researchers divide these adaptation responses into 3 different buckets. We call them adapt, accommodate, protect, or manage, retreat, or just retreat, okay? And so adapt, accommodate really has to do with, you know, working around, letting the water come and working around it, right? So modifying existing structures, redesigning the built environment, so elevating our buildings, retrofitting them with water pumps and swales and things to divert water, and also increasing setback distances about where people can build and be, you know, located in relation to the shoreline. Protect responses are really about defending the built environment as it is, right? So either using hard measures like seawalls or revetments or groins to just protect the built infrastructure and divert water, or soft measures like beach nourishment or living shorelines, you know, building the coral health, coral shelves, planting green, you know, more native species and restoring dunes to their natural state so that they can do their natural job of protecting the coastline. And then manage retreat is has to do with, you know, relocating or removing existing developments out of the hazard areas. So limiting the construction in those areas and development, like, you know, we have wonderful mapping now of where we think the water will be inundating, whether it's at 2 feet, 3 feet, 6 feet. So we can see the specific areas where they're going to be the most impacted by sea level rise. So we can use zoning and permitting and all of these other sort of policy measures to stop building in those areas and maybe relocating, right? Or incentivize inland development rather than development right along the coastline. So we wanted to provide the policymakers with a wide variety of different types of responses to sort of get their appetite for where they think. And we're really at the beginning of making decisions about all of this, right? And so, so you'll see there's a wide variety of interest. So starting with those adapt or accommodate policy approaches, again, you see a lot of strong support for adapt and accommodate. Revise permitting and building codes, right? Provide tax or other financial incentives to help property owners elevate or flood-proof their buildings. And then a lot of support for providing government funding to protect or flood-proof critical public infrastructure, equipment, and utilities. But when we look at the protect type ones, right, there's also strong support for restoring and promoting living shorelines that buffer against sea level rise, right? But mixed support, right, for building walls. And we have passed legislation that doesn't allow private property owners to construct seawalls. And there's a lot of battles going on. It's a very hot political issue. But it's interesting to see there was still, there's still a mixed sort of sense of support about walls and other structures. And it's still on the table to build walls and hardening structures for a lot of public infrastructure, right? But private homeowners don't get to do that. And then for managed retreat, you also see a lot of support for a variety of managed retreat approaches. And that's a lot of these, there have been a lot of these approaches bandied about. And so you see there's a lot more examples that we ran by the legislators. But again, this one shows a lot of support for creating policies that encourage inland rather than coastal development. The enforcement of Act 16, which prohibits private property owners from building or enforcing the hardening structures, right, along the beaches, those seawalls. Changes to regulations such as zoning laws and increased setback or buffer distances, right? A lot of support for that. That's a very low-hanging fruit compared to some of these other huge infrastructure investments we might talk about. And then creating policy that mandates removing seawalls in areas with no beach left after erosion. Finally, provide government funding to relocate critical infrastructure, equipment, and utilities. So what does this say? I mean, we have adapt, protect and retreat, and there's support for all of these measures, right? And I think that really just indicates that, again, we're at the beginning of this process. The state and several of the counties don't have adaptation strategies in place yet. Well, we now have mapping of the sea level rise impacts available to us. We have a lot more research to do around all of these different options and the costs and benefits of each and the things that we sacrifice. If we're going to save our beaches, we may be losing a lot of houses. If we're going to save our houses, we may be losing a lot of beachfront. And so what do people value? A lot of conversations need to happen around these topics. And so the policymakers are broadly, yeah, all of this sounds good. But the other thing is, how much is this stuff going to cost, right? We have all these options around, about what do they actually cost? So my team at the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience is currently modeling out the costs of a lot of these different strategies for Hawaii. We'll be starting a project in Waikiki soon. Again, we can't really begin to have real conversations about which of these strategies until we know, and not just the financial costs, but again, what do people value and what might be lost as a result of taking some of these measures, but not others. And also I would say that the policymakers, there's a lot more that we need to learn. They're generally favorable, but probably don't know a lot about the specifics of these, just because a lot of these approaches are new and in evolution, right, in development. So one of the last slides I want to share with you is a slide. We asked them what obstacles prevent you from passing sea level rise related policy, right? What are your 5 top obstacles? And the top, go figure, lack of funding to implement a plan, right? Followed by lack of coordination among agencies and stakeholders. Followed by lack of funding to prepare a plan, not implement, even just prepare a plan, right? Insufficient staff resources to analyze or assess information. Lack of precedents and demonstrated success of policy. That's the need for more case studies, right, to show how these approaches actually work. And lack of existing regulatory tools to implement policy. So these are, and we allowed some write-ins too, but they really gathered around these specific obstacles. And actually, a number of these things are solvable. I think we have a wonderful state climate commission that is starting to coordinate across agencies, but they're pretty understaffed. And so we need to do a lot of work around finding funding to build out the agencies. There's also, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 vacancies across city and state government offices. The people that are supposed to be doing the building permitting reviews, like everybody's complaining about how slow that is. There's not enough people working in that space. There's not enough people to go out and monitor the beaches for people putting up burritos and hardening, measures. So we really need to solve this problem about, staffing and financing. There's been a number of different measures that have been discussed about that. Could we implement new taxes, right? Could we be taxing tourists? How do we tap into the infrastructure, the IRA Act, the IRA money that's coming in from the federal government. There's just a lot of questions, whether it be for funding the policy and the research or implementing the plans that we have, or imagining massive investments in our infrastructure. And then I just wanted to share this with you. We asked finally, if the respondents would like to receive briefings or additional information on these topics. And there was a lot of interest, and I think this also points to the need for more information about different strategies, what they cost, how to actually do them. And just wanted to flag this for you researchers here at East-West Center, at the University of Hawaii, and around the region, that these policymakers are hungry for more information. And so we need to do a lot more sort of technical studies and case studies that we can present them with so that they can be better informed about the different issues. So I'm going to stop there. Happy to answer questions. I just think, sort of as a final thought, I didn't share this slide, but we did also ask where the policymakers are getting their information from and how often they talk with people about it. No, there's not many people, whether they're voters or advocates or nonprofits, that are talking with their legislators with any regularity about sea level rise. Very, very little input. So I think if we want to move sea level rise higher up on the agenda, then we need more people talking to their legislators. And then the last little bit is that the legislators are really looking to researchers at these institutions, at University of Hawaii and here at the East-West Center, and other researchers for information. That was their top information source about sea level rise, followed by local and national media. So it's a call to all of you to please reach out and share your studies and information with your legislators. Thank you.
Thanks, Ketty. So we are now open for Q&A. Those in the room, if you have a question, please turn on the mics in front of you and go ahead and ask them. Those who are online, please post your questions in the Q&A box, and they can be funneled to the speaker. Please, whoever.
Thanks for sharing, Ketty. I have a question about the sample size. Obviously, you did your best to get as many as possible, but do you believe that, with 32 respondents, it was total respondent is 32, yeah?
Yeah.
So 2 questions. One is, do you feel that maybe the people that responded just had a general interest already in this topic? And do you feel like this 32 is representative of the legislator as a whole? And do you think that you could actually make some of the statistics you showed were based on the county level, which if you show 50%, it's basically maybe 2 or 3 people. Do you think any confidence in that, or yeah?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I flagged at the beginning, that the caveat is that while the respondents were anonymous, we expect that they probably were the people more interested in this, right, in this topic and working on it. And for most of our paper that we published on this, we treated both groups, state and county council members together, simply because the county council members were so low, right? So I don't think it can be representative, but it's still something, and I think it's still some insight into, I guess, again, this most likely case, like, and maybe, I guess, the people that are most likely to be worried about sea level rise, and yes, they are, but oh, it's not at the top of their priority list. So that tells us a little something too, right? And it's not to point any fingers, right? There's a lot of pressing issues like houselessness and the economy, right? That those things tend to take up a lot of time. It's harder for policymakers to think in the longer term because they're dealing with the issues now, right? But your point taken, and I agree, it probably isn't going to be representative of all of the
Yeah,
legislators.
just to follow up that one statistic where you said, well, it is kind of reassuring that folks are concerned, except for the, 70 people that didn't fill out the survey, right? So, and then since I'm asking, I just have one more follow-up. The slide you showed towards the end, where you showed all the obstacles facing I thought that was interesting because you see those kind of same obstacles in really most of the developing world as the issues beyond adapting to climate change. And what I'm seeing here, though, are not really a lot of things that folks could communicate to legislators. This seems like it's more of a top-down problem where the administration of the state is not prioritizing these things. It doesn't matter if the constituents want these things, but if the money's not there to hire people and to put plans in place and everything, that comes from the top down to prioritize those things. So I wonder if you could share any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that a number of these issues just come down to political will, of our legislators. And so again, case in point, like, we need to understand more what they're thinking, right? And again, yes, I think top down, like, coordination should be state level coordination across the counties and down into the neighborhoods, right? And localities. And again, we need to be reallocating resources and coming up with new funding resources in order to pay for all this, right? So I do think it's a matter of getting this prioritized at the top in the elite politics level. But how does that happen, right? It's, we do, I think, need more voters signaling that this is an important issue for them, and that we need to be working on issues of homelessness and the economy and affordability now, but that simultaneously we need to be starting to develop our systems and monies and et cetera for the longer term, right? This is always the issue though, right? Politically, politicians, right, they're thinking about the next vote. There's a 4-year, 2-year, or 4-year term limit. It's just the inherent nature of democratic politics in this country. But this is one of those things which is longer term, and it's just hard to get that all to match up. So yes, I think that it should actually, so I don't want to say that these policies should be created top down. They should be coordinated from the highest institution in the state. But they should not be made without a lot of input from local people, right? Because what we know is in adaptation, without getting the input from the get-go about people are willing to do and what they're not willing to do and what they value and don't value, then it's not going to work. And then just the complexity of this issue, right? It's going to require a lot of coordination across agencies and groups. Again, I think it's entirely appropriate for state level government to be more involved, and county. I mean, government, the scale of government should be involved with this. Gretchen?
Thanks, Ketty. I really enjoyed hearing you speak about the research, and this follows on the last question, and also what you said at the beginning, that seems to be more interest because this happened post Lahaina. There's more interest at the moment in something that's also kind of both short-term and long-term, which is fire and fire prevention. So are there ways that the focus on fire prevention also can address sea level rise? Just like the question too I would have around say houselessness, are there ways that some of these shorter term concerns can also have longer term focus that might overlap with sea level rise?
I think absolutely. I think, you know, how we choose. So for instance, taking Lahaina as a case, how we choose to redevelop Lahaina. Should we be rebuilding in a wildfire zone / in a coastal flooding area? Should we rebuild Lahaina there in the same way that it was? And not only that, but should we rebuild Lahaina in the same way that disenfranchised a lot of people? There is a lot of people that weren't doing well economically or socially before the wildfire. And so, you know, a lot of people talk about how these maybe larger scale adaptation projects could also be, if we do it well, if we're smart, we can do it in a way that does work to address some of the other structural and pre-existing issues. Yeah, I don't want to say that the wildfire completely took the eye off the ball of sea level rise, right? Yeah, I think I've seen some news articles kind of framing larger climate change and adaptation issues, linking the wildfires to sea level rise, right, and other issues. I think we need more of that. But again, there's such complex issues that I just think part of the goal of this survey, I think we need to do a lot more surveys, and we need to be writing a lot more and doing a lot more art that visualizes what our future might look like, right? So, because people have a hard time, the beach is going to go away, and you know it's all going to be different. So let's provide some positive images and ideas about what things might look like in the future, and talk about how they might be done in a way that's going to, you know, empower more people and create more housing and solve these other wicked problems.
Just a second. We have a lot of questions from our virtual audience, so let's ask a few of them. So one of them is asking if you have had an opportunity to compare the responses from Hawaii with those from, say, California or New England or any other place where I believe Democrats are.
Yes, interesting that
Yeah.
you asked that question. There have been a smattering and a scattering of surveys done in different states, like California, some a little bit done in Florida, some of the East Coast, northern side of the East Coast. But not, I mean, there hasn't been a widespread, you know, coordinated effort to do survey work around this topic, around adaptation. So part of what the purpose of this study is a pilot. We would like to take this survey and do it around all of the coastal states, implement the survey. We're in conversation with Sea Grant about doing that in partnership with the other Sea Grant states. But ultimately, there should be survey work done in all the states, even if they don't have coasts, because again, the scale of funding that's going to be required, it will probably have to come, at least a big part of it, from the federal level. And I'm sure that there's a lot of non-coastal states that aren't even thinking much about sea level rise. So it would be nice to know more about, you know, where do the policymakers land on this? And again, as I said in the beginning, even, you know, surveys of the general populace nationally, there's just a very scattered framework of surveys that have been done. So there's a huge opportunity in this space to do more. We built this survey around by looking at some of the existing ones, like the ones in California and Virginia. And so we do hope to be making some comparison between the surveys, but I think that some of them happened several years ago. I think it would be nice to do like a coordinated survey just for comparability purposes. So anyway, this is another call to action. We need more survey work again around adaptation. I'm not just saying sea level rise, but fires, you know, forests and adaptation of our animal populations and that kind of thing. There just isn't that much survey work done compared to the general topic of climate change mitigation. So yeah, I would love to see more of that and do more of that.
Another question asked by a virtual audience is about the adaptation choices. You had one of the slides where different choices were shown. Is there any, what drives their choices? Is it political expediency? Is it the availability of cost? What is it that drives policymakers' choices of adaptation
So
strategy?
so this is a survey, and in as much it's limited, it's a bit surface. We do plan to follow up with policymakers to do some interviews to dig into why, what the what's and what criteria they are using to make these decisions, but they're not deciding it. See, they just think they're all great, right? But we know that cost will be a big concern. And then the politics, yes, the politics will come into play. I think one thing that's really interesting about the Hawaii case study is, while there was widespread support for so many different strategies, there was a lot less support. There was a lot more dissent about whether or not to use buyout systems to bail out homeowners. People just aren't, wanting to create government programs to basically, supplement or help the wealthy, right, is the perception. But when we asked a question, well, if you could create a buyout program that is scaled and will be helping more vulnerable, legacy homeowners that have had the same property from grandma and grandpa down the generations that maybe don't have a lot of money, they would consider that. So my team is also looking at different buyout schemas and how that might work. But it's interesting here in Hawaii, right? In the US, generally speaking, people are all about protecting private property. And the overwhelming feedback from our survey is people don't think public funds should be spent on helping private citizens, like maintaining private property. Very, very interesting. But not surprising in Hawaii, given we have a public trust law and have long, been thinking about the beach as our public trust and that type of thing.
Thank you. A few questions, please.
Jay?
Hi, Ketty. You said in effect that politics and political action is reflexive, right? And we've seen this at Lahaina, even as we had the example of Paradise for a fire burning out of the Wui. And I have pushed the question of the lack of imagination with that to people. Here, we're talking about a really slow motion issue by and large. The house that fell at Kainui was spectacular in its tiny single family way. Does your group have any ideas about how to get the larger body politic to care about something that is so slow moving?
Yeah, I mean, that's just the big question. Again, human nature seems to respond only to when a big catastrophe happens, right? And so, yeah, when there's something dramatic and fast, like a wildfire or a tsunami or a hurricane, right, then we spring into action. But we fundamentally need to change this human behavior if we're going to survive what's coming, right? And indeed change the behavior that's creating it in the first place. So I think a lot of us talk about that. How to do it? Again, I mean, in a democratic system, right? And you have to think about the incentive structures that get politicians to adopt policies. They do care about what their voters think. So as I said, it's important that voters and constituents go talk to their legislators. But unfortunately, I think it's probably going to take some crisis that we can immediately link to sea level rise beyond one house, falling in, that is going to lead to the scale of response that we need to do and in the timeline. But that's kind of, I mean, that's the mantra here, right? Like, look, this is a slow moving crisis, but it's happening, right? Like, we know it's happening and people agree that it's happening. So let's try to do something about it. And I don't want to imply that our state isn't doing anything about sea level rise. Actually, we're pretty high in the pack compared to other US states in terms of getting policies put into place. And we are building a foundational infrastructure of policy. The city and county is just working on passing its of Honolulu, passing its new adaptation strategy, right? It's adaptation plan by the county council so that it's enshrined. And I know that there have been a lot of resolutions for the state level commission to get an adaptation plan in place as well. So, and just the fact that we have these wonderful interactive maps, and we're slowly starting to put things into place. So I don't want to say that we're not, and in fact, you know, we are the leader of the pack, you know, in terms of other states, but we do need to do a lot more, and we need to be moving a lot faster than we are. And yeah, I mean, how do you change human behavior? We need more behavioralists working on this and more folks studying, you know, the behavior and, you know, policy choices of the elite politicians for sure. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
Hi, Ketty. Thank you so much for your talk. I was very interested in what you were saying about how a case study approach is probably going to be quite important precedents for dealing with some of these issues. So I was wondering off the top of your head, what are some case studies that you know of that might be relevant?
Oh, there's a lot. You know, well, I would say to go to the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience, to our website. There's a lot of really good work being done, sort of mapping out the various. So what do people value? They've done a lot of survey work around what people value about their beaches and various beaches around the state. And again, just finished a case study of the North Shore and what the costs might be. There's a ton of research coming out of the Netherlands. There's consortiums of people along the coast in the US that are doing a lot of research. If you want to send me an email, I'm happy to push some your way. But you know, we need to understand buyouts a lot better. So my team is working on looking at the buyout structure, and how that might work. The natural scientists are working on dune restoration and coral restoration, and there's just all kinds of work. But I think the question is, you know, how do we evaluate different types of strategies against one another? And how do we put these strategies in place in a comprehensive way and not just have one-off a buyout program here and a seawall for this critical infrastructure there? How do we start thinking more comprehensively, pulling from this menu of different policies, and how do they fit together in a way that's going to make sense? Again, the thing about adaptation that's really hard is every locality is so different, both in terms of geology, geography, cultural, you know, ideation and values, that we need a lot more work on what people want. And so we need to, like, again, show them what the options are and what they cost in order to get that. But yeah, there's a lot of case studies, and there's a need for a lot more. And there's a lot of we're just in the stage of experimentation. I mean, there's countries like the Netherlands that have been dealing with water, right? Or like Florida has been dealing with typhoons and water for a long time, and they have a lot more experience than we do. They have pumps set up in Miami, Venice, right? There's a lot of places we can look that have been dealing with flooding regularly. But then thinking about this sea level rise thing, and how we can adapt much larger communities is going to be the key. And so, yes, more experimentation, more case studies needed. Lance, I think we got 5 minutes.
Lance, go ahead.
Ketty, thanks for coming over, giving the talk. I'm just to clarify, the scope of the survey was really focused on climate adaptation,
Sea level rise.
sea level
adaptation.
rise. And I'm comparing that, and I'm wondering if you would agree that, you know, these same policymakers and these bodies they promote themselves as being they lead the nation in climate mitigation measures. So Hawaii is a clear leader, they would say, and replicated throughout the states. I'm curious how you would explain the difference in that action that they have taken around climate mitigation versus adaptation, and what in there is something we could use to focus towards adaptation. Is it the deadline when they're far out of office that we have to meet, that the targets that when we set them, would that help us out, and what can move the dial?
Well, I think that, thank you for that question. I think that, gosh, I have a lot of responses to that. First of all, you know, as a globe, we have been setting goals and working on mitigation for longer. I mean, we've only really started to think about, okay, we're going to be locked into 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature rise and all of the things that brings, right? Like we're just now starting to go, okay, I guess we're not going to meet our goals for reducing emissions enough to prevent that scenario from happening. So there's been a lot of action over the years around trying to stop that. Hasn't worked. Now I think we'll start to see a lot more focus on adaptation as well. And then they're really kind of fundamentally different. With greenhouse gas mitigation, we can say we need to, this is a target, this is how much emissions we have, this is what we need to get down to. It's something we can measure to a fine point, right? It's hard, but we can do that. Adaptation, again, is so localized, and it really comes down to, what do people want? Again, do you want to save the beaches? Do you want to save your house or your community and that kind of thing? Again, the geologies are so different. The coastal tides, the rainfall. There's Pacific RISA here has been mapping the rainfall. Like we've got also drought is a big issue, and so it's just a lot harder to come down to one set of criteria. So again, I think we need to do this menu option and then calculate for individual communities, A, what they want, and B, what are the specific options are the most relevant to those communities based on geology, geography, culture, and all that. So there's a lot more work to be done. But yeah, I think those, to me, that's how I separate out the adaptation and mitigation space. But obviously one is highly dependent upon the other.
We have time for a couple of more questions. To what extent are policymakers aware of all the work on climate change that's happening, say, in the University of Hawaii?
Again, I think because of the great work that, particularly people like Chip Fletcher here at UH and his Climate Resilience Collaborative, and McKenna Kaufman, who I work with, they've been on the state commissions and county commissions and beating the drum about this for years. And so, again, when we ask that question, like, who do you look to for your information? And the top response was the university researchers and scientists. I think that's, again, it's Hawaii, there's only 1.4 million. It's a small state. We have a lot of personal up close interaction we're able to meet with our legislators, but there's just been a lot of great work, particularly among the scientists and social scientists to bring this to their attention. And I do think that they told us they look to the university for that kind of information and guidance.
Another question online is how do certain aspects of climate change rise to the top of the policy priorities? In the sense, is it like some kind of a crisis like the fire or the house collapse that we were just talking about? What is it that really pushes, say, sea level rise or forest fires to the top of policy agenda?
Well, there's a whole body of academic research on how politicians prioritize the policies. Oh my gosh, that's a long answer, but definitely a crisis event will bring things to the top. Whether there's budget changes, or changes to, of information related to how a program is being implemented. There's a myriad, there's a whole bunch of studies from political psychology to, budgetary studies to the role of crises. And I don't think there's any one that is more successful than the other. Politicians, like all of us, are complex individuals and have a lot of different things that are feeding into their calculus. And then there's just the politics within the party, right? And horse trading around specific bills, right? Well, I won't do this one this year because, let's go with yours this year. There's so much in that. And actually, it's a great question. I'm working on a paper about that right now, and looking at several theories about why and how policy, sea level rise policies are not rising to the top of the pile. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. Ketty. It was really good. And I don't know about sea level rise. It might be a few decades away, but in this room, I think an ice age has already set in. But thanks, everyone. Thanks to the people who have come here and also to the people who have joined us virtually. It's really appreciated. Also, a big shout out to people, Kelly and Jamin and Carolyn, for providing support at the back end. And with that, we must conclude this talk. Next week, next month, on the 21st of March, we have Mr. Yashwant Deshmukh. He leads one of the largest polling agencies in India, public opinion agencies, and he'll be talking about the Indian elections, especially since the Indian election is just around the corner and about 1 billion people are expected to vote this time around. So it'll be an interesting talk. So do join us for that. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.